Okay, hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for what is the fourth Zoom installment of the S' Artist Book Reading Series. We are your co-hosts, A.B. Gorham, and I am Aaron Kohik. Tonight's reading features performances by Servane Briand, Patrick Allen Fenton, and Samuel Mignot, Leslie Berns, Ms. Wormhole, and Caitlin Cass. Okay, so our first readers for this evening are Servane Briand, Patrick Allen Fenton, and Samuel Mignot. Patrick Fenton is a Bay Area-based artist, designer, and educator whose work delves into the intersections of time, place, identity, transformation, and interfaces. He is passionate about the role of visual makerspaces and print as catalysts for building creative communities and sparking self-expression. Samuel Mignot is a writer and programmer interested in how digital processes influence and change how we engage with and create art. Born in Paris, Servane Briand is a printmaker and book artist based in San Francisco. In 2019, she started the project Passages of Babel, an exploration of the space in between idiolects, a collaborative project on language, poetics, and translation. Each person has a personal language, what George Steiner calls an idiolect. To work on a project together and to experience it is to translate. Arise by any other name is a reflection on how every book is constantly changing. That, as a postmodern Heraclitus might put it, you cannot step into the same book twice, but that this is fundamentally what makes books worth reading. Tonight will be another exercise in translation, reading live from a big version of booklet number 10 of the 12 booklets total in the project.
As a child, he had been told that beginnings are the false structures that we invent in the formless, unyielding expanse of the past. And he had said,
What does that even mean?
though of course he said it however a child might, and they had told him,
You were never really born. You are only some reconfigured motion, some reconfigured particulates.
so he had resolved from that young age to discard his life as it happened.
Not to forget, of course, though he very much would want to, but rather
To reattribute.
to treat his memory as someone else.
Every morning he woke at 6.
Every morning he looked at the clock on the wall.
This detail would make one unable to think of his room as anything but a schoolroom.
He looked at the straight line of the hands, that hour like the back of a beetle.
When he met people, he began conversations as though they had already started.
When he read his books, he would start them in the middle. He would place the book flat on a table and find the first page where the book was balanced.
Where the weight of pages on both sides held it open.
He measured everything.
This is what people who hate beginnings and endings do.
The middle is the illusion that there is width, but there is only depth. There is only something getting further and further away from us, a bird lodged deep in the darkening sky. One could say that her fingers touch life while the others simply operate the machinery at its ends. One could say she is of the world and therefore more beautiful, more relevant, more important than her sentinel sisters. That is, if we are, as we claim, arbiters of meaning.
After all, the string she has touched is all the time that has been lived. Her hands have passed over the exact totality of time experienced,
which is thorough.
which is beautiful.
Though this assumes she's responsible for the strings of dogs.
And of frogs.
Yes, and yes, even of ants.
Which begs the questions of their material and shape, where there is something ant-like to the string of ants, or whether simply each string has its own color.
Which begs the question of phylogenetic consistency, and whether, say, a wolf and a dog have similar colored threads.
Tawny hues, one would suppose.
And if so, what determines the mapping from genes onto bands of light?
Is there an elegance to the formula, or simply convenience, a formality?
But surely we're not thinking.
With mounting anxiety.
What of microbes, brief and shockingly frequent?
To which I say, let us ignore microbes, because things are already pretty inconceivable without considering lachesis hunched with telescopic lenses over trillions of invisibly thin threads, because we are already in over our heads imagining even ants and insects, the lives of smaller, briefer things, which must be so much more intricate and difficult to measure, requiring, ironically, more time.
Which begs the question of whether there are more things dying right now than there were when there were fewer people, whether the job is getting harder.
Which begs the question of whether they have interns, women in white, who practice on the easier animals, or if there is indeed more life and more death, whether there is a factory where the threads are teased apart and attended to by giant machines.
Can go no further, for why should a litany not stop as it reaches its undeniable peak?
Cresting majestic.
The last wing stroke of a bird driven by electromagnetic impulse, crow flight towards the sun.
Ah, the unsurpassable peak of bows of Rachab.
Bows raised like Remulus by the gentle ministrations of a wild animal mother, a fish mother to be precise.
To be precise, an adventive Tigris salmon who nudged his river basket to the river banks, away from the torrents, the deep water into which he had been destined to descend.
Not downriver, but straight downriver, drown river.
A mother who fed him the caviar of would-be stepbrothers and loved him like her own.
Brothers who didn't die but slipped between his infant teeth and hatched and swam inside him, would advise him for the rest of his life, their fish wisdom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. All right, our next reader is Leslie Berns. Leslie Berns, an interdisciplinary painter, makes work on and of paper and mixed media, painterly, sculptural, and performative objects. Her research on the construction of race and mixed race identity in relation to a broad social and historical context is graphically conveyed through the visual language of geometric abstraction, figuration, and the metaphorical use of materials. A 2023 James Weldon Johnson Foundation Fellow, she was in residence at Simon's Rockbard College, a quarter of a mile down the road from James Weldon and Grace Nail Johnson's summer retreat, 5 acres, and Johnson's writing cabin in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. Born in Buffalo, New York, to parents of German and Jamaican heritage, Leslie holds a BFA from Pratt Institute and an MFA from the Yale School of Art, both in painting, and a former senior lecturer of fine art at the University of Maryland, College Park. Leslie is currently based in Hudson, New York. Her project, an altered book, is titled A Book Begets a Book, Altered Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man.
Hello. Okay. I'll be reading bookmarked excerpts from the autobiography of an ex-colored man by James Weldon Johnson. The very first excerpt is from the introduction written by William Leake Andrews, a professor and scholar of early African American literature at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. All the rest of the excerpts that I'll read are from the novella. Content warnings in one of the excerpts, the N word is in print, and one of the excerpts refers to a lynching. My apologies, one of my slides is a duplicate. I just discovered. So I will share my screen. When the time came for him to confront his identity in a broad social context, however, Johnson's summer in rural Georgia taught him that he could not think of the Black country folk as something apart from himself. They were me and I was they. A force stronger than blood made us one. I wish all of the white scholars to stand for a moment. I rose with the others. The teacher looked at me and, calling my name, said, "You sit down for the present and rise with the others." I did not quite understand her and questioned, "Ma'am?" She repeated with a softer tone in her voice, "You sit down now and rise with the others." I sat down dazed. I saw and heard nothing. When the others were asked to rise, I did not know it. When school was dismissed, I went out in a kind of stupor. "Oh, you're an N-word too." I heard some Black children say, "We knew he was colored." "Well, Mother, am I white? Are you white?" She answered tremblingly, "No, I am not white, but your father is one of the greatest men in the country. The best blood of the South is in you." This suddenly opened in my heart a fresh chasm of misgiving and fear, and I almost fiercely demanded, "Who is my father? Where is he?" She stroked my hair and said, "I'll tell you about him someday." At this time, I went in for music with an earnestness worthy of maturer years. A change of teachers was largely responsible for this. I began now to take lessons of the organist of the church, which I attended with my mother. He was a good teacher and quite a thorough musician. He was so skillful in his instruction and filled with such enthusiasm that my progress, these are his words, was marvelous. In my mind, I ran over the whole list of fathers I had become acquainted with in my reading, but I could not classify him. The thought did not cross my mind that he was different from me, and if it had, the mystery would not thereby have been explained, for notwithstanding my changed relations with most of my schoolmates, I had only a faint knowledge of prejudice and no idea at all how it ramified and affected our entire social organism. I felt, however, there was something about the whole affair which had to be hid. I do not think it is claiming too much to say that Uncle Tom's Cabin was a fair and truthful panorama of slavery. However that may be, it opened my eyes as to who and what I was and what my country considered me. In fact, it gave me my bearing. I felt leap within me pride that I was colored, and I began to form wild dreams of bringing glory and honor to the Negro race. From my first glance at my mother, I discerned the light of death upon her countenance. I fell upon my knees beside the bed and, burying my face in the sheets, sobbed convulsively. She died with the fingers of her left hand entwined in my hair. I had The peculiar fascination which the South held over my imagination and my limited capital decided me in favor of Atlanta University. So about the last of September, I bade farewell to the friends and scenes of my boyhood and boarded a train for the South. He informed me that it was the best place in town where a colored man could get a meal. I then wanted to know why somebody didn't open a place where respectable colored people who had money could be accommodated. He answered, it wouldn't pay. All the respectable colored people eat at home, and the few who travel generally have friends in the towns to which they go who entertain them. He added, of course, you could go in any place in the city. They wouldn't know you from white. The sounding of a bell, he told me, was a signal for the students to gather in the General Assembly Hall, and he asked me if I would go. Of course I would. There were between 300 and 400 students, and perhaps all of the teachers gathered in the room. I noticed that several of the latter were colored. The president gave a talk addressed principally to newcomers, but I scarcely heard what he said. I was so much occupied in looking at those around me. They were of all types and colors, the more intelligent types predominating. The colors ranged from jet black to pure white, with light hair and eyes. Among the girls especially, there were so many so fair that it was difficult to believe they had Negro blood in them. Through my music teaching and my not absolutely irregular attendance at church, I became acquainted with the best class of colored people in Jacksonville. This was really my entrance into the race. It was my initiation into what I have termed the Freemasonry of the race. I had formulated a theory of what it was to be colored. Now I was getting the practice. And two, the player, the dexterity of his left hand in making rapid octave runs and jumps was little short of marvelous. And with his right hand, he frequently swept half the keyboard with clean-cut chromatics, which he fitted in so nicely so as to never fail to arouse in his listeners a sort of pleasant surprise at the accomplishment of his feat. I began to wonder what this man with such a lavish natural endowment would have done had he been trained. Perhaps he wouldn't have done anything at all. He might have become at best a mediocre imitator of the great masters and what they've already done to a finish, or one of the modern innovators who strive after originality by seeing how cleverly they can dodge about through the rules of harmony and at the same time avoid melody. It is certain he would not have been so delightful as he was in ragtime. By mastering ragtime, I gained several things. First of all, I gained the title of professor. I was known as the professor as long as I remained in that world. Then, too, I gained the means of earning a rather fair livelihood. This work took up much of my time and kept me almost entirely away from the gambling table, though through it I also gained a friend who was the means by which I escaped from this lower world. I decided last night that I'd go to Europe tomorrow. I think I'll take you along instead of Walter. Walter was his valet. It was settled that I should go to his apartments for the rest of the night and sail with him in the morning. My boy, you are by blood, by appearance, by education, and by tastes, a white man. Now, why do you want to throw your life away amidst the poverty and ignorance in the hopeless struggle of the Black people of the United States? Then look at the terrible handicap you are placing on yourself by going home and working as a Negro composer. You can never be able to get the hearing for your work which it might deserve. I doubt that even a white musician of recognized ability could succeed there working on the theory that American music should be based on Negro themes. And thus, traveling about through the country, I was sometimes amused on arriving at some little railroad station town to be taken for and treated as a white man. And 6 hours later, when it was learned that I was stopping at the house of the colored preacher or school teacher to note the attitude of the whole town change. At times, this led even to embarrassment. Yet can it not be so embarrassing for a colored man to be taken for white as for a white man to be taken for colored? And I have heard of several cases of the latter kind. Charred fragments sifting down through coils of chain, and the smell of burnt flesh, human flesh, was in my nostrils. I walked a short distance away and sat down in order to clear my dazed mind. A great wave of humiliation and shame swept over me. Shame that I belonged to a race that could be so dealt with, and shame for my country, that the great example of democracy to the world, should be the only civilized, if not the only state on earth, where a human being would be burned alive. All along the journey, I was occupied in debating with myself the step which I had decided to take. I argued that to forsake one's race to better one's condition was no less worthy an action than to forsake one's country for the same purpose. I finally made up my mind that I would neither disclaim the black race nor claim the white race, but that I would change my name, raise a mustache, and let the world take me for what it would. That it was not necessary for me to go about with a label of inferiority pasted across my forehead. My acting had called for mere external effects. Now I began to doubt my ability to play the part. I watched her to see if she was scrutinizing me, to see if she was looking for anything in me which made me differ from the other men she knew. In place of an old inward feeling of superiority over many of my friends, I began to doubt myself. I began even to wonder if I really was like the men I associated with, if there was not, after all, an indefinable something which marked a difference. That moral courage requires more than physical courage is no mere poetic fancy. I am sure I should have found it easier to take the place of a gladiator, no matter how fierce the Numidian lion, than to tell that slender girl that I had Negro blood in my veins, a fact which I had at times wished to cry out, I now wish to hide forever. I was in constant fear that she would discover in me some shortcoming which she would unconsciously attribute to my blood rather than to a failing of human nature. But no cloud ever came to mar our life together. Her loss to me is irreparable. My children need a mother's care, but I shall never marry again. It is to my children that I have devoted my life. I no longer have the same fear for myself of my secrets being found out. For since my wife's death, I have gradually dropped out of social life. But there is nothing I would not suffer to keep the brand from being placed upon them. Several years ago, I attended a great meeting in the interest of Hampton Institute at Carnegie Hall. The Hampton students sang the old songs and awoke memories that left me sad. Among the speakers were R.C. Ogden, ex-Ambassador Choate, and Mark Twain. But the greatest interest of the audience was centered in Booker T. Washington, and not because he so much surpassed the others in eloquence, but because of what he represented with so much earnestness and faith. And it is this that all of that small but gallant band of colored men who are publicly fighting the cause of their race have behind them. Even those who oppose them know that these men have the eternal principles of right on their side, and they will be victors even though they should go down in defeat. Beside them, I feel small and selfish. I am an ordinarily successful white man who has made a little money. They are men who are making history and a race. I too might have taken part in a work so glorious. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Leslie.
Thank you.
So our next reader is Ms. Wormhole. Ms. Wormhole is the kooky, artsy-fartsy alien art teacher from outer space that you wish you had in elementary school. She is an enigma to the social world and often sticks out like a sore thumb. She loves that she is an alien and isn't ashamed to rain her alien experience on the earthlings she is in commune with. Ms. Wormhole has officially landed in our Zoom call, and she has a perspective to share with you. As an alien making her way around various art circles, she has come to realize that the graphic designer's role in the art world is very much like the role of the drag queen in the entertainment industry, proposing the idea that graphic designers are, in fact, drag performers.
I think we're having a little technical difficulty with Ms. Wormhole. Let's go ahead and move on to Caitlin and we can come back.
Okay. So, slight change of order. Caitlin Cass is the creator of the Eisner Award-winning graphic history suffrage song, The Haunted History of Gender, Race, and Voting Rights in the U.S. Her cartoons have appeared in The New Yorker, The Lily, and The Nib. Her art has received funding from the New York Foundation for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Arts. For the past 15 years, she has self-published a bi-monthly comic zine called The Great Moments in Western Civilization Postal Constituent. Caitlin will perform an excerpt of her in-progress graphic memoir/history, tentatively titled Imagining Disaster.
First, you should know, I live alone now. I'm experiencing what most people might call a midlife crisis. I've been following symbols, frogs, and birds, staring out the window, making connections. I had a dream that a fluffy cat transformed into a sphinx cat in my lap, dropping grubs all over me. The grubs burrowed halfway into my skin and then just sort of flapped there. When I was growing up, there was a sphinx cat that roamed my neighborhood, and I was very afraid of it. Suddenly, okay, my interest in disasters began early. Suddenly, there was a total panic. People started clawing at each other like wild animals, trying to escape from the blazing inferno. At 7, I played an Iroquois theater fire victim in our local cemetery walk. I saw Anna fall and people stepped right on top of her as they fought their way to the exit doors. But these doors open inward. With so many hundreds of people fighting and clawing to get out, many of us ended up in huge piles right in front of the exits. Not long after I played my first disaster victim, I became convinced that I was dying of a rare disease that the doctors would never understand. God bless Mom and Dad and Courtney and the McMahons, and please make me not die. I started sleeping with my head by the open window, even when it was chilly. Cocooning against the cold gave me comfort. I think I saw something about the fresh air cure on a historic home tour. Plus, obviously, the open window made me closer to heaven. And if I do have to die, please make it after the sleepover on Saturday. Between our 2 yards, my house and the McMahons, I really lived out an idyllic childhood, and yet disaster lurked. I just knew. I knew because Annie was an orphan, and we played orphans all the time. It's a hard knock life for us. Instead of treated, we get tricked. I knew because loggers tried to destroy Fern Gully. I knew because Timothy from The Secret of Nim got pneumonia at the worst possible time. I don't want to be Timothy. I want to play Mrs. Brisby. Nobody ever wanted to play the sick person. But most of all, I knew because I had a secret.
It hurt when I had to pee, and doctors didn't know why. The pediatrician thought the pain was probably in my head. We could try the children's hospital if I wanted to. I thought about it, but I didn't want to make everyone uncomfortable. And it seemed like I was really weirding people out. It seemed like they'd all prefer to pretend that my pain wasn't there, and so I pretended. I figured it might go away on its own, like headaches sometimes did. I don't want to push you, Kate. You decide when we go. Falling asleep, I tried to convince myself that the pain had passed, but then I'd wake up with that now familiar burning sensation and need to rush to the bathroom for relief. Back in bed, I'd toss and turn, considering how I might will the pain to stop or make a potion to banish it. But at least a year passed before I gained the courage to go back, or to ask to go back to the doctor. Recently, I learned that marks in the labia majora were often used to identify witches in 17th century England. Women were inspected like livestock. My doctor's visits were far less sinister, but they felt so awkward that I didn't tell any of my friends. The 17th century also marked a change in childbirth in England. Female midwives had long taken care of birth, but now men with forceps elbowed their way in. The midwives said the forceps were violent. In retaliation, men wrote treatises to discredit them. Midwives are so much to blame, especially the younger and more meddlesome ones who make a marvelous potter when they hear the women cry out with their pains and implore assistance. From the outset, the scientific revolution was built on denying women's pain. I learned about William Harvey in History of Science at college. We studied his On the Motion of the Heart and Blood in Animals. We did not discuss his anti-midwife treatise. There I am reading Beyond Good and Evil. I went to a great books program focused on Western classics. Whenever we came across a sexist or racist comment in the text, people would brush it off as an irrelevant relic from another time. What do you all make of the part where Nietzsche says, when a woman has scholarly intentions, there is usually something wrong with her sexually? When someone insisted on discussing it, their comments were often minimized and seen as tangential to the real matter at hand. It's from the 1800s. What do you expect? The first guy I kissed. Later, I learned that he was trying to kiss every girl in our class. This depression often felt physical to me. Sometimes I'd leave class with cramps in my abdomen and lower back. I wanted to keep discussing sexism, but I didn't know how to communicate all the layers of my entanglement with it. The question kept blooming out and out. How do sexism and racism, overt or covert, impact the overall meaning of a text? A canon? A life? How do racism and sexism impact an ecosystem? In the 1990s, Vandana Shiva wrote about the problem of reductionism in modern science. The assumptions of reductionism are based on uniformity, perceiving all systems as comprising the same basic constituents, it's discrete and atomistic, and assuming all basic processes to be mechanical. There's Vandana speaking in 1993, and behind her, there's Man as an Industrial Palace after Fritz Kahn. So this was my rendition of his illustration, with the men running the body as a machine from the brain. By ignoring what could not be understood and focusing on what could be, many scientists learned to see nature as a machine. But we are not machines. Here I am at 3 in front of a security sign. I've been combing my archive looking for evidence of repression, and this work has distorted my sense of time. Time keeps blooming out in a network of relationships. As my unconscious becomes conscious, I'm sitting in this doorway thinking about that non-consensual game of doctor and how it maybe could have triggered my pain, wondering if it also had to do with the fact that I like girls. Here I am at 13. Here I will be. There I am. And this is the same year I wrote this. It snowed more today. The world is pure white for miles, and it's so deep it buries the bushes and covers the security signs. It's all so pretty, even though it made me shovel. After school, I walked with Zeppy, talked more about religion and stuff. Dave was saying it was a sin to be gay. Kathy doesn't think the Bible says that. I'm pretty sure it does. Somewhere, anyway. It makes me sad. That shouldn't be a sin. Anyway, I told Zeppy how I was scared of going to hell, and she said she didn't worry about that. She says she might as well. So I'm thinking about the grubs occupying the threshold between inside and outside, to move to between, to know that you are both. Halfway in, halfway out. But what happens when the grubs become beetles inside of my skin? As I witnessed that Trump red line surmount Harris blue, I thought about human beings as resources. How terrible it was to watch that unqualified rapist beat a well-qualified woman for the second time. I'd just spent 5 years making a book about women fighting for the right to vote, so, none of this was surprising, but I felt it in my body. My muscles tightened. I cried, closed my laptop, and went to bed. I don't want to be a victim, and yet I stare into the smoke. I research its origins. Oh, to find connections on this sinking ship. My college experience was mostly magical. I got to live on a mountain for 4 years and talk about books. This made the sexism more unsettling because I felt slightly guilty for noticing it. I think you just restated exactly what Miss Cavazade said. You did. We called each other Miss and Mr. in class. Our class was about 70% male, but I found some lifelong female friends. I wish we would read more women authors. Well, he let me translate that Sappho fragment in Greek at least. And in 3 years, we get to read Virginia Woolf. 2 years till Austen. In lab freshman year, we got to read an excerpt from Annie Dillard's Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. The secret to seeing is to sail on solar wind. Hone and spread your spirit till you yourself are a sail, wetted, translucent, broadside to the merest puff. After our discussion, we went out into the arroyo to practice seeing. I sat under a pinyon tree, drew wild asters, and tried to be broadside to the merest puff. Some of my classmates groaned at this new agey exercise, but I ignored them and pondered lichen. Annie Dillard inspired me to apply to be a lab assistant the following year. I didn't make the first cut, but they offered me a job working with the January freshmen. Who's ready for their sheep pluck? That's the heart and lungs of a sheep. This was the course where we read the anti-midwife blood lover William Harvey. One of my jobs was to raise fertilized chicken eggs so that we could observe the growth of an embryo's heart and veins. When they were ready, we cracked the eggs open into petri dishes and marveled as feathery veins pumped blood into red dot hearts. There was so much wonder involved in Harvey's science. If we discuss his anti-midwife treatise alongside the Heart and Veins book, what might we have learned? Perhaps something about how tempting it is to harness awe into power. And maybe it would have helped us begin to see that we don't exist outside a network of relations, because action at a distance is real, and we are all entangled. And did you know that you emit light when you look.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. So it looks like, due to some technical difficulties, that is the end of our reading.